Good afternoon, fellows and friends. I'm Sherilyn from the Singapore International Foundation. Thank you for joining us at the Arts for Good Fellowship panel discussion. It's bright and sunny in Singapore this afternoon, and we hope all is well wherever in the world you're tuning in from. After a short hiatus last year, we're excited to be able to bring the fourth cohort of our Arts for Good Fellows together in our virtual program this year. Today, we're also joined by our Arts for Good alumni and friends from around the world who wish to build a better world with us through the power of the arts. Please use the chat box to introduce yourself so we can say hi. Before we start exploring our journey in digitalization of the arts, Singapore's Minister of State for the Ministry of Community, Culture and Youth and the Ministry of Trade and Industry, Ms. Loh Yen Ling, has a few thoughts on the topic to share with our audience. As she can't be with us live today, she has pre-recorded her remarks and will now share her video.
Ambassador Ong King Yong, Chairman SIF, Ms. Jean Tan, Executive Director SIF. Friends of the arts, a very good afternoon. It is my pleasure to be here with you today. For the past 30 years, the Singapore International Foundation SIF has helped build networks of social impact and brought global communities together. Due to the pandemic, we are now having to meet online and virtually in these challenging times. The SIF has been striving to maintain and grow its networks and relationship through virtual means, such as today's panel discussion. A lot has changed in our lives as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we know that things will not return entirely to how they were before. This is no different in the arts, which traditionally relies on in-person connections, be it at performances or in galleries where viewers interact with the artwork. Despite these challenges in the past 18 months, one thing remains unchanged, and that is the arts have continued to provide comfort and nourishment to our souls. That is why MCCY and the National Arts Council, NAC, have rolled out various initiatives under the Arts and Cultural Resilience Package to sustain livelihoods, encourage the adoption of new skills, and digitalization amongst our arts practitioners. These support measures, coupled with the resilience and inventiveness of the practitioners, give us confidence that our arts community in Singapore will continue to adapt and engage new audiences at home and abroad. We will find creative ways to enrich lives through the arts. We strongly believe in the power of the arts, that they enable us to form connections across communities, cultures, and even geographical boundaries. And I'm glad to see that the SIF too recognizes this, and it has been working hard to promote cross-cultural and cross-sectorial understanding and collaboration for social good and to uplift the communities. For example, the SIF has been a strong advocate of the arts for the social impact. It supported the Arts and Disability Forum organized by the NAC and the Very Special Arts Singapore. The forum brings together regional and international practitioners to exchange views and best practices on how the arts can increase access and promote inclusivity. The 2020 edition, which was held digitally for the first time since 2016, attracted over 200 participants from more than 20 countries. Another way in which SIF has sought to champion the arts for social good is through its Arts for Good Fellowship, which has also gone digital recently. The fellowship was set up in year 2017 to foster a community of practice that harnesses the power of the arts for social impact. Over the past 3 years, it has nurtured more than 90 artists, art administrators, the social sector practitioners and professionals from 18 different nationalities, and continue to make positive impact on our global arts community today. Some of these Arts for Good fellows have overcome COVID-19 travel restrictions by successfully digitalizing their arts project which now reach out across physical borders to engage different communities. One example is the World Wisdom Map, led by Deepak Ramola and his team from Project Fuel in India. The interactive digital map documents life lessons and personal reflections of individuals from 195 countries. It hopes to inspire others and provide comfort for those coping with isolation during this pandemic. This unique database of stories also inspired a series of exclusive artworks by Southeast Asian artists and students from India and Singapore. There are now insightful narratives and an educational module for the public, inspiring and promoting multicultural learning and exchanges amongst the global communities. We are looking forward to another 32 fellows from 12 countries joining the growing Arts for Good ecosystem this year. I'm glad that the SIF has creatively replicated fellowship experience in this year's inaugural digital edition with its partner, the Landaway Foundation. Over the next 5 months, the fellows will use an online platform to network, exchange ideas, and collaborate before embarking on the second leg of the fellowship with a virtual program that's hosted by the Landaway Foundation. They will then create a community project with social impact. We welcome more of such creative, cross-cultural, and international collaboration projects. These efforts bring out the best of the arts and deliver social impact for the good of our society. I wish you all a very fruitful discussion ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of State, Ms. Dorian Ling, for your well wishes. I'll be handing over the time to our moderator, Ms. Jean Liu, to start off our exciting panel discussion. For those of you in the audience, please remember to type any questions you have for our panelists in the Q&A tab to keep the discussion going. Without further ado, Jean, over to you.
Hi, thanks, Sherilyn. Very good afternoon, everybody. See the chat box really active. And keep them coming. My name is Jean, and I am the co-founder of Superhero Me. It's an inclusive arts movement that advocates for the stronger acceptance of children with disabilities in Singapore. Very happy to be a moderator for this afternoon's discussion with our really awesome panelists. I'm sure you know everyone has had a wonderful time networking and sharing your journeys in how the arts and tech can contribute to the wellness of young people in the digital age. And I really hope that this afternoon's panel discussion can provide you with more insights useful to your work as you consider how to take this forward in this so-called new normal, right? So, I mean, going back to why we're all here, it's no secret that the pandemic has accelerated digitalization in the arts. With the sector deploying these technologies and for artists to put their work online with unprecedented speed. And in this new normal of Zoom calls, safe distancing practices, how has the pandemic impacted the way arts companies and practitioners in Singapore approach their work, interact with audiences, and work towards their social mission at the same time? So this afternoon, I'm really excited to have three distinguished panelists together with us. We'll introduce them briefly. Ms. Guo Tianhong, Artistic Director of the Theatre Practice, who will share about how her team has pivoted programs to the digital space. We also have Ms. Tan Jia-Yi, 2018 Arts for Good Fellow, co-founder and COO of In the Wild, who will talk about how her projects, strategies, and learning has really helped them move forward in terms of managing arts and tech projects. And last but not least, we have Dr. Sharon Chow, Director of the Cultural Academy Research at MCCY and Chief Research Officer at the National Arts Council, who will share insights from research about arts and tech and enlighten us on some possibilities going forward. So our first speaker this afternoon, Ms. Guo Tianhong, she's an award-winning theatre director, lighting and set designer, and independent filmmaker who has always taken on multifaceted roles within the arts. Tianhong's artistic vision encompasses the broad spectrum of practices' artistic output, which transcends themes, genres, and forms. And since 2020, she has been leading the practice team in developing hybrid digital live theatre and really pushing the limits of how theatre can be done. So over to you, Tianhong, to share more.
Thank you, Jean, for the introduction. And 30 years of SIF, I think it's quite special. Actually, a little bit of trivia. Actually, SIF was set up when I was a student in Los Angeles about that long ago. And so I think the work it has done to build bridges around the world is actually very important. And I was one of the benefactors so many years ago. So it's great to be here to share. So maybe I will start off with a brief introduction of what the theatre practice is for many of you who may not know. Next slide, please. We are actually a 56-year-old theatre company. This is our building. It's a very nice heritage building in downtown Singapore. And to give you a little bit of background, in order to understand our DNA and why things happen the way it has happened. It was formed in 1965 by theatre pioneer Ko Pao Kun and dance pioneer Goh Lei Kwan as a theatre and dance school. So the education and advocacy efforts is very much in our DNA. And today we have about 24 full-timers. And what is unique, I think, about our company is it's a theatre company, but we're not really restricted by forms. So, you know, we do it because we advocate. How we do it is actually quite open. And also the other thing is some unique thing about us is one, it's quite complete in terms of the institutional structure, right? We have all the departments that a theatre company should have. And our personnel, our human resource is very hyphenated. So for example, you know, I do lighting, I do film, I direct, but I'm not the only one. Many people in our company is like that. So what we do is we have a black box in there, and then 24 of us pack up during normal times and we create work. And we have been on the street, Waterloo Street, for over 30 years. Next slide, please. So where this started was last year in February, March, we went into, you know, peak preparation for this show called Four Horse Road, which is a promenade theatre piece. That means the audience move from places to places, pack in small rooms, and look at, you know, us tell stories of the street. And as we were ready for the show, the pandemic, or rather COVID, started getting closer and closer to us. Eventually, the outcome was that we had to shut the show down. We only ran 2 days out of a 30-day run. And the result of it is not only moral defeat in the most impactful way most of us have known, is also huge financial loss. But I suppose hitting the ground or hitting the rock bottom so fast was, you know, in retrospect, probably a blessing in disguise, because you can only go up from here, right? Because if you are not so down, you are still waiting for it to go further down. And we just hit down. And then we had to start rethinking about what is it that we can do? How do we go on from here? And like many people, the first thing that we all felt was the fear of being forgotten. Because, you know, now you cannot go to theater anymore. What's theater when people cannot gather? How do we continue to be relevant? How do we continue to be useful? So everybody started showing archives, and, you know, the only place left for us to converge is online. Next slide, please. So we had to make very difficult decision, and we had to re-envision. So we ask ourselves some key questions. What is our value? What are our strengths? How can we continue to be useful? And who needs us, right? Some people say, okay, if you go online, it's not live theater, it's a poor cousin of TV. But when you ask these questions, none of it says that we need to be in the same space. It just means that these are the things that we ask ourselves. So what is our value? How can we still be relevant? And one of the things that we realize is, unlike all the other times when we wish somebody walk into a space and they all share the same experience, it's never like that. But this time, in the last 2 years, the whole world have shared many, many more common experiences than ever before in the past of human history, at least my history, my lifetime. And as creators who create experiences where we come in and converge and share, this is actually unprecedented, you know, harmony or synchronicity of our state of mind. How do we use this? So as we went through this, next slide, please, we decided that we still have to continue our work, that we need to bring the show online. And who needs us? Theater for young audiences. Because when the shutdown happened, everybody was locked up in small quarters, and parents have to be, working, and kids have to be studying, and they all have to get along. And parents were running out of, gas to try and engage the kids, and the kids were all going crazy and isolated. Human connection was so crucial. So we decided we're going to go online. Next slide, please. And in terms of how we decide our, next slide, please. How we decided on what, previous slide. We decided that there were two basic principles that we are going to keep with what we do. One is that it's got to be live, and two is it needs to involve meaningful audience participation. Next slide. So since April last year, when we started, March, until now, we have done almost 50 different projects, different configurations of online projects. And what I would like to do today is to share some of these samples with you. Next slide. We started all at home, when we all just find what we can find and just make it up. Next. And when we go back to the black box, you see that it's still pretty much what you can find. Because this is what the backstage looks like. And I'm sure right now, if we go outside our frame in this webinar, it will probably look a lot like that too. Next, please. So we started doing this production that is based on nursery rhymes that we have been working on and developing with stories, with images, and we harnessed them all together and created this piece of work called Here Comes Kaya Roti. Kaya Roti are basically bread and jam in the local equivalent, right? Coconut jam. And the subtitle is Where Are My Friends? Because that's what the kids were yearning for. Next slide. And I'd like to show a bit.
我们开始喽！
Peter 和他的妈妈，还有他们新买的小毛驴，住在乡间的一个小农村里。小农村环境清幽，景色优美。每天早上 ，Peter 最喜欢在他家外面的稻草堆里打瞌睡。
主人来了，快跑啊！过来喽！哎呀，不得了，这可真糟糕！我的伙计呀，跑到哪儿去了？快点找一找，快点找一找！原来他偷偷跑到菜园里去了。
快来，快来，快来，快来，快来，快来，快来，快来！我们会进菜园，快把它抓到！看见我们，它又跑呀，跑到稻草里去了。
哎呀，我的伙计呢？
Okay, thank you. Okay, go to the next slide.
Good.
So as you can see, this is when we develop into the theater, when the actors are in the same space. But the makeup of it is pretty much iPhones, laptop, Zoom, whatever we can buy cheaply from Taobao to construct a temporary theater space. And we had to start developing our vocabulary in the theater. Next one. And if we can look at the next one, it will start playing. If you can just lower down the volume, I'll talk over this as it's going because I don't have a lot of time. So we got into the home, and then now we wanted to go into the school. And for the longest time, we were performing, not seeing the audiences like what you saw previously. But we finally able to, set up these systems with schools, knowing how to teach them, set it up remotely, where we can hear them, we can see them, and they can participate live. So it's voting, it's responding, call and respond. It is singing and sing along. It is dance along. In this case, it was the joy of seeing the kids, of seeing our audiences that we're so used to, so taken for granted in live theater, was a big leap forward for digital theater. And the connection was able to go one step further. So what we have realized is that a lot of times when the kids come into the theater, they feel very shy or awkward or not as safe as if they're in their classroom or at home. But when you go into their space, when they let us into their space and they participate, they are a lot freer, a lot more ready to engage, a lot more willing to give. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? So as you can see, this next one, we went one step further. We decided to take this experience into homes, into a 2-day camp, 1.5-day camp, where the kids built tent in their home. We sent them a care package, and then they were able to participate and discover what creativity and theater making and play and family time can be like during these tough times, but also allowing us in to be one of their play companion, to facilitate and to share with us. So it was a very precious experience. At night when they said goodbye to us before they retired to their tent, probably, was one of the most satisfying moments of the event. Next, please. So as you can see, for adults, for many of us, some of us juggle with all this technology, but with youth, they are the digital native. So we decided that one of our associate artists developed a piece of work that decided to have a chance to meet the digital native on a subject that should be of great concern to them, which is social media and climate change. And with this, they were able to connect that with them on Zoom, through Telegram, through Instagram. We're using animation, film, and live performances. So if we can take a quick look at the next trailer. This is targeted at about 13 to 18. And so there's live interaction on Telegram that they vote, they comment, they help the characters deal with the dilemma of, should I go and save the tree? How do I deal with this through a platform of social media where it itself is another kind of worms?
My name is Poppy. This is the first time I'm meeting you like this.
Okay, so next slide, please. And from there, we move on to something that is a little bit more complicated. I'll let you take a look at the trailer and I'll explain what it is like. Can't hear the sound, I think.
She needs to be taught a lesson. 就是不喜欢她的脸。Ular kecil itu yang bisa dilakukannya hanya mendesis. 你们为什么要这样对我 How far would you go to silence her? I don't know. Maybe.
Can you go to the next slide, please? So this was a collaboration that between a hotel, us, that was supported by a Singapore Tourism Board. What you saw is actually chapter 1, which is you watch a play, a movie, a film play that explains somebody got killed, there's a police, and who are the suspects? Chapter 1. And then chapter 2, on the same night, you go in and do live interrogation of the suspects. Chapter 3, you go online to interrogate, to investigate in the space through 360 photos. And chapter 4, you come back and see who done it. All right. So if you think about our journey, we started with trying to reclaim this connection with the audience in terms of what we're used to as storyteller, as stage performances. And then we slowly expand to finding the audience. And then we expanded to, more medium that is very unique to a digital space like Telegram and animation. And then eventually with this, we went into the territory of film and of gaming, but actors, live actors as well, because of the live interrogation. So this was very much the journey that we have been trying to, we didn't know where this would take us in the beginning, but this is where we end up being. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this is a little bit of what you see. We built our own digital theater, and then the audience, everything is embedded. The audience interrogates the suspect, and then they have chat on the site to ask the questions. So this is, they can see the show on Monday and submit the result by Sunday, and Sunday night is when the review. And this is a 1-week engagement where the audience were playing games and talking to us and texting us for clues, right? Rarely in theater do we get this kind of engagement where they remember you, actively participate with you, and for a whole week. Usually we are lucky if after they see a show, they go out, have supper, and remember what they have seen. So if we can go to 2 slides. Thank you. So in terms of digital content, actually before the pandemic was already happening, but we had no resources to develop it. We had no bandwidth, and really there's no reason. So now we still have no resources, very little, limited, but we have a little bit more bandwidth and a lot more reasons. Because if you don't start looking at it, if you not start finding the alternatives, then we are just stuck at being at the mercy of however whatever direction the wind blows. And of course, the question of what is life, right? If we're not in the same place, it is still life. Well, I suppose, I'm curious if we were all watching the Olympic game at a 100-meter dash, in that 9 or 10 seconds, did we all feel like we were there at the same time? Where we experienced life at the same time? So life is still very much experienced. It's just different from what we think about in theater. We just have to put away some assumptions and look at how we can redefine what is important to us. If the priority is we have stories to tell, people to connect with, and audiences to listen to, and this dialogue and to bridge these difference of thoughts and convergence, then we cannot be snobbish about the physical space being the only place that we can gather. So I think from here on, there are still a lot of things that can be explored. Can we go to the next one, please? And I do think that the future actually needs a lot of support for artists to continue to research and develop, to retool facilities to support such a work, to retrain the workforce, because all job descriptions has changed, to reimagine the process and to redefine what this output can be. Next. And finally, for us, the digital theater space or platform or skills or art form is not a band-aid. It's not a stopgap situation. I think this is here to stay for the long term, not just because of the pandemic, but because, for example, climate change has made certain, thinking assumption, challenging certain assumptions. So we do have to think about how we want to go on from here onwards. Like us, I think the world also hit rock bottom at some point. So the question is whether we just go back to same old, or whether we can take this opportunity, take some risk, not be so afraid of failing, and then find some new territories and create possibilities for all of us in the future. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Tian Hong, for that sharing. I got really excited just watching the trailers, and I think you guys too kind of see our chat box really alive and buzzing. If you have questions for Tian Hong, do type it in the Q&A, and hopefully we have time to get it answered later. So I think I'll just move on to introduce our next speaker for this afternoon, Jia Yi. She co-founded In the Wild, an award-winning multidisciplinary design company for arts and culture, and is part of the team working on the inaugural Arts and Tech Lab by the National Arts Council Singapore. And Jia Yi is also an Arts for Good Fellow with the SIF and serves on the board of advisors of Diverse Abilities Dance Collective. And she also advises the National Youth Council's Young Changemaker community. Over to you, Jia Yi, to share more about your work.
Thank you for the kind introduction. For today, I'll be sharing learnings based on my work and observations, which I hope will be helpful for your practice as you start thinking about what digitalization is about and whether to embark or not. But before that, I would like to briefly introduce myself and my background so you can actually see where I'm drawing my perspective from. My work cuts across 3 different roles, which I see as firstly creative, secondly as the intermediary, and thirdly as an advisory role. So actually when SIF first invited me as a panel speaker and I was informed of who the 2 other speakers were, I got a little emotional. So in my role as the creative, I learned most of what I know about theater at the theater practice. And it was actually Tian Hong who first gave me the opportunity to try things out. So without that seed, I really wouldn't think I would still be in this industry today. And yesterday night, I was just looking back and it was exactly 10 years ago. So if I may say, it's quite a full circle. In my role as the intermediary, where I manage the strategy, operations, and client relations at In the Wild, I've had the opportunity to work quite a fair bit with the National Arts Council. And, like as what Jean shared, I'm currently working on the inaugural Arts and Tech Lab with them. As a studio, we work very much with organizations in the arts and culture field, both locally, regionally, as well as internationally. And lastly, having been on the receiving end of so many opportunities in my journey, I do take on advisory roles with both nonprofits as well as the Singapore government as a means of paying it forward. Through these roles, I consult mainly on youth and arts related issues. I don't actually see the 3 roles as being separate from each other. And do you think that it allows me to glean new perspective and the ability to be the bridge across different stakeholders? And then lastly, really as a caveat to this presentation, the perspective that I'm sharing are really solely my own and not representative of any organizations I'm affiliated with. So if we can get started, next slide, please. Yeah. I do think it's important, before we talk about the learnings, perhaps for ourselves to take a moment to think about the challenges we face or we observe as a result of digitalization. So if you could type it in the chat and ensure that your message can be seen by everyone, that would be great. Yep, Kavita mentioned, it's not a familiar space, it's a gap in access, Zoom fatigue, very real. I tend to kind of zonk off after a while. Boredom, quality of images, unstable Wi-Fi, and it being very technical. Yeah, please keep it coming. Looking for new platforms, with Michael talking about the new rules of engagement, interaction, how can we have meaningful interaction even on the digital space itself? Oh, Jeffrey commenting on noisy family members. Okay. Energy, yep. Okay, if we could move on to the next slide, please. So if I could broadly categorize the challenges that you have shared, they normally lie within 3 main categories. Firstly, coming from a personal kind of perspective that, it's really tough, thinking that I'm not the tech person, yeah, why should I kind of do this? So it's much harder for me to take on digitalization. Secondly, is really coming from an organizational point of view, be it thinking of your practice as an organization or, as a collective. You have a lot of things to think about, and perhaps digitalization is really not that high on your priority list. And lastly is what I categorize as the artistic as well as technicality component. So I've heard, creative sharing with me that, the tech or the practical realities of it could not match with what creative envision. So, and you know what, all these points, including the ones that you shared in the chat, these are all valid. So next slide, yeah. So I just want to say that I'm not here to discount these statements, nor am I here to preach about how digitalization is the magic pill that will solve all your problems. But rather, I hope that you will hold a space for me as I share how you can make your experience working on digital projects better, as well as the possibilities you can explore. So first things first, how can you make your experience working on digital projects better? Firstly, it's really establishing common understanding in a form of language, knowledge, and ways of working. The same word can actually mean different things to creative versus technologist. So the question really is, how can both creative and technologists as a team articulate and have a shared language? To the second point on, establishing the common understanding that we come from different levels of knowledge. And speaking from a creative point of view, we cannot assume that technologists understand what we do or even our practice at all. And we need to also understand that, we aren't going into a project trying to learn everything about another discipline or all the technicalities of it. So the question here really that we want to ask ourselves is, how can we set parameters on the shared knowledge space? Can we also, meet one another where they are, but yet at the same time, we're still pushing the boundaries? To the last point on ways of working, as with every new working relationship, is trying to navigate each other's ways of working. So second point on finding the right partner, the big question really would be, as with all kinds of relationship, are we right for each other? In this specific scenario on arts and tech, is really, your partner may have the technical knowledge, but the question to ask yourself is your partner adventurous enough, patient enough, open-minded enough, and whether, your partner is curious enough to walk this journey with you. And thirdly, on the part about understanding your audiences and process, there's really two parts to this. The first thing is really understand that the audience behavior and profile of your live audience versus digital audience is likely to be different. And what does this mean to us? It likely warrants a remapping and rethinking of who you want to reach out to. And of course, the important question is, how can you create a better experience for them? The silver lining with all this digitalization and in going digital would also mean that on top of your regular audience base, you can now reach out to a new group of audiences, both locally and internationally. And to the second point, it's really acknowledging and also recognizing that the process of creating live works versus digital works are different. So if we move on to the next slide. So in knowing what we know, what then are the possibilities? Building on to the previous point that the process of creating live works versus digital works are different, let me give you an example. So with digital works, you can now direct the audience gaze more strongly. What this has direct implications to your artistic vision, or how you are going to approach it from an artistic point of view. And it's something that perhaps we can then explore and experiment on the possibilities that digitalization could help support and propel our creative ideas further. To the second and third point on monetization and sustainability, I'm sure you know that it warrants a session of its own, and I'm also mindful that I won't be doing these 2 points justice. But in this presentation, I'll just highlight some things to note. First thing first, monetization. Can we move to the previous slide? Thank you. First thing to note really is monetization does not happen if you simply put your content online, without consideration of your content strategies, distribution strategies, as well as other considerations. And, giving an example, creating quality digital content requires resources, both monetary as well as non-monetary in the form of, for example, technical expertise, as well as, when we put our content online, we are essentially competing internationally for the same eyeballs, attention, time, and money. Then the question to ourselves is really, how can we stand out? And, how can our works have a place in the digital world, and yet at the same time, still in line with our artistic vision and practice? I'm not saying that monetization is not possible. Rather, it's really going in with our eyes open and knowing what we're in for, and how we can actually, with all these considerations in mind, strategize and play it to our advantage. There are definitely ways to monetize, be it directly or indirectly. So if I could give an example, and I'm drawing a lot on performing arts, of course, you can actually adapt it to other genres of art forms as well. So let's say you have a performance that is filmed and choreographed for camera, and you can, sell tickets for a special run of this digital performance locally in your area or things like that. However, you can also take an additional step or have an additional consideration at the point of creation. And, with COVID-19, many international festivals are going online or having a hybrid modality, which means that they would be interested in purchasing programs for their festivals. And one such example would be the Sydney Opera House, who continues to roll out both live and digital programs. And it's also worth noting that, for digital performances, they have both paid and free categories. So if we go on to the next slide, with that all said, I really want to assure you that not just in Singapore or even Southeast Asia regionally, but also internationally, everyone is really trying to figure things out. And if you think about the question that I asked everyone at the beginning of the talk, the challenges that you have faced, you will see that in the chat, you're not alone, and there are other practitioners who are facing similar challenges as yourself. So in wrapping up my presentation, where do we go from here? So this panel was convened as part of SIF Arts for Good Fellowship Program. And this year, the program explores the intersection between arts and tech and, in achieving social impact. So with regards to social impact, I'm definitely not an expert, but I'm fortunate to have friends and partners whom I consult in and journey with. So here's a special shout out to Nick from the Equal Dreams team, Dr. Dawn Joy Leong, and the Diverse Abilities Dance Collective team. When we think about leveraging digitalization for good, perhaps it's also good to think about two things. First thing is on representation. Second is on sustainability again. With regards to representation, it's really questioning who's not at the table and involving persons with lived experiences right at the start of the project and not as an afterthought. On sustainability, it's really to ask ourselves, what can we do to continue to sustain the positive impact in the communities that we work with beyond the post-pandemic normal, so that it's not just a one-off engagement and we leave. And it's important to acknowledge that with digitalization, it has allowed for more access and inclusiveness, creation of new audiences. And perhaps what we can really do is think about how we can take, and I quote, the good and bring it forward to the new normal. To the second point, it's also really thinking about new possibilities and in the process creating new works that you're proud of, while considering how these can actually be a new revenue stream for you, which can help support and propel your practice or organization forward. I think this really brings me to the next point, which is the importance of thinking about how digitalization fits into your longer term strategies. And really, really, please do not digitalize for the sake of digitalization. Lastly, it will be a journey with much to learn. And it's really okay to take small steps to actually break it down. It's important to recognize that everyone is at different stages, and that is okay. Don't discount the small step ups, as well as the importance of celebrating small wins. And lastly, very importantly, you don't have to journey on your own. Find the right partner who is able to bridge your artistic vision with technical as well as physical possibilities. And this will really make the working process much easier and honestly less painful. So as you have held the space for me, I hope you will hold a space for digitalization as well. Thank you for listening. And this is actually how we can keep in touch. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, PIE, for that really exciting sharing. I think it's really interesting how you've managed to find that niche in working with digitalization, and yet constantly thinking about how, different practitioners in the art can really benefit from this. Our last speaker this afternoon is Dr. Sharon Chang, who oversees teams who studies social impact, arts and cultural engagement, and manpower issues in Singapore. Sharon is an economist who has research experience in productivity management and growth, industry development, choice experiments, and the non-market valuation of cultural resources. Over to you, Sharon, to share some insights.
Good afternoon, friends, both Singapore and overseas, and those like Jeff, who's like in Adelaide but still logging in. Hello and welcome home. As you've heard, I'm an economist. I often say this as a mea culpa at seminars, well, webinars nowadays for a couple of reasons, seminars on arts. First, to warn you that there is a prevailing acknowledgement that economists are people who have always wanted to be accountants but did not have enough personality. And second, to also caveat that I will not have amazing videos like Jen Home or nice attractive pictures on my slides. But I do have nice attractive figures, I mean data. Well, moving on. Let me start with a quick recap of how it was for us in Singapore in 2020 and still in 2021. I think our Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Hsien Loong, summarized it best when he labeled this pandemic the crisis of a generation. In Singapore, we had survived the shocks of the 2003 SARS and the 2008 Asian financial crisis, which were respectively health and economic shocks. But in COVID-19, a public health crisis very quickly snowballed into an economic, social, and even political problem. Countries took umbrage at being associated with the disease and its variants. Stereotyping sparked conflict and even violence. So the sensitivities that remain today is pertinent because they have the potential to jimmy wider our traditional societal risks of race and nationality, and particularly for us in Singapore. We were and are particularly vulnerable in Singapore, as I said, because of our smallness, our openness, and our dependence on international trade, tourism, and talent flows. The economy sputtered and tanked even as the infection spiked. Sectors such as aviation, tourism, retail, manufacturing, and construction struggled with falling demand or disruption to their operations as a result of the various governmental measures. In Singapore, which packs almost 6 million people into 730 square kilometers of land, you can imagine the challenges of ensuring safe and distance work and social interactions, especially for a prolonged period. And from the citizen lens, an enforced lockdown coupled with the stress of job uncertainty without travel to relieve anxiety, something we Singaporeans know very well, mental well-being was a key area of concern. Moving to slide 2, zooming in to the cultural sector. Let me quote the Idea Consult, a consulting company which wrote a report for the European Parliament Committee on Culture. Pre-COVID-19, the culture and creative sectors were already characterized by fragile organizational structures and working practices. The fragmented organization of value chains, the project-based working, and the not well-protected intellectual property IP-based revenue models were a danger to the survival and sustenance of this sector. So although the report was written about the EU, many countries will recognize this familiar tune. Since the COVID-19 pandemic hit Europe in spring 2020, the cultural and creative sectors have been among the most negatively affected sectors. It's no different for us in Singapore, but it's not all bad. If you can see, I'm sorry, those words are really small. If you have, and the report's freely available online. While disruption of business activities have brought difficulties to livelihood, difficulties to interaction among people, they've also, because of the resilience of human spirit, sparked innovation and creativity. And so we see in March 2020, more orange boxes, which are like the disadvantages brought about by COVID and the pandemic and the measures that needed to battle COVID, and fewer green boxes. But eventually, in May, June 2020, with communities, countries coming together, like societies banding together to try to find or medical fraternities banding together to try to find a solution, some good has also come out of the crisis. Moving on. What about the arts and culture sector in Singapore? Our journey of digitalization in and of and for the arts sector was not really a panic scramble reaction to COVID-19. From as early as 2013, we had already been picking up weak signals of art audiences, quite fluid movement between the live and online media. If you notice from 2013, live engagement was a low 40% of the population. But in terms of digital engagement, because iPods was just coming online, streaming was just starting, people get excited, 91% of the population. 2050, because of SG50, we had many live events, live audience engagement in the arts shot up to about 80% of the population. But in terms of digital engagement, it stayed steady at almost 9 in 10 people. So we noticed this trend that Singaporeans tend to switch quite fluidly between the digital and the live engagement in the arts for a variety of reasons. And in Singapore, we noticed that when people are particularly stressed for time, although they are really lovers of the arts, they still continue to engage, but in many different forms. Sometimes there's not something in ways that are not picked up either by audience statistics that we measure, but that we use, or through the surveys that I conduct. For example, if they went to the mall and they noticed that the arts activity was going on, they would stay, they would be engaged for longer than, say, you're just someone who was not interested in the arts, but this would be something that will not show up in statistic numbers, for example. So when we developed our Singapore SG Arts Plan, we had a specific focus on technology and its application to both art making as well as engagement in the arts. So we started designing the plan already in 2016-17, and this plan was launched for 2018 to 2022. And so this early governmental community investments in technology would come to serve as well when COVID-19 rocked up to our shores. Moving on. Building a foundation in technology as a broad general medium strategy is important, but of course, like every other country, a targeted fiscal response to supporting the arts sector was needed. So for the economy as a whole, 2020 saw 4 expansionary budgets comprising support measures for our arts companies, our individuals, and our households. It's 2021, they continued with a stabilization budget with 2 critical themes: continuing immediate support for the sectors, for jobs, as well as transformation for post-pandemic world. For the arts sector in particular, there was a 75 million Singapore dollar arts and culture resilience package comprising subsidies, grants, cost waivers, among other things. So the key priorities for us as we designed these packages was to protect livelihoods in the sector, first priority. To number 2, to enhance capabilities, to prepare for the immediate industry disruptions and also for a post-COVID world. And thirdly, to ensure that there was arts content available digitally for Singaporeans. Next slide, please. So we have this specific grant to help our arts community. So we had the digital presentation grant to help them pivot to, if they were not already using it very actively, that people like for people like Jen who are very experienced in this sector. But for those who are not yet able to make that leap, the digital presentation grant, digitalization fund was to help them make that sort of take small steps or take that leap into the new virtual online world. So we also had organization transformation grant, which was just launched June 2021 to support organizations in their transformation efforts. And of course, we have the self-employed persons grant, because as I mentioned just now, a key priority for the government was to really sustain and support livelihoods. So to date, through the support of the ACRP, the Arts and Culture Resilience Package measures, NAC, the National Arts Council, has supported about over more than 12,000 work and training opportunities for arts practitioners. It's also generated more than 700 digitalization projects and programs by our arts and culture practitioners. And across the larger culture sector, including our heritage folks, the ACRP has supported over 13,000 job and training opportunities. Moving on. So coming from research, we support policy making and program development by ensuring that there is robust evidence gathered through our administrative data. There's one that comes through the way you interact with the government and at different public sector points, through our surveys and through our studies. Right. So the shift in research work that COVID-19 sparked was, if I could just sort of summarize in 3 broad categories, a greater focus on number 1, sustainability, well-being, and digitalization. Sustainability, we needed to bolster our understanding of both freelancers and art organizations to understand the vulnerabilities. We asked ourselves what types of support are needed before they can once again reach their audiences, reach their markets. In particular, because of the need to put some restrictions on audience sizes, we were also looking around to understand the science, to sort of give scientific basis to the limits on performances, both performances on stage as well as the audience capacity. In terms of well-being, the initial shock and discomfort of enforced lockdown translated in poorer mental health. So this was an opportunity actually for the arts to provide a respite. But we also asked ourselves, how effective would these be if the key component of the arts experience, right, the sociality of going to experience a play, listen to a piece of music, to go to a museum or the gallery to look at a piece of work. If all these were removed, the component, the social component removed, what is the impact on the individual? What is the impact on communities and societies? How do we compensate for this? So when I heard just now about attempts by the results of work by Tian Hong's digital theatre practice, and how it went into the classroom, they spotted a business opportunity, go into the classrooms and see how kids were able to still, enjoy the almost the full experience of the art activity. This is very heartening. So COVID-19 also saw racism and anti-foreigner sentiment rear the ugly heads in Singapore. So a question for us and for our arts partners, what can arts do to help heal these societal fault lines? And as a researcher, how do I measure the outcome of this so that I can provide this for greater advocacy for the arts? In terms of digitalization, we have urged our makers and companies to pivot to gain new capabilities, but the question was, while we could give them grants to produce, how do they monetize? Jia, you spoke a little bit about this. Right? So we found the evidence that online does not cannibalize. But during COVID-19, many had a taste of the convenience of the digital. So will they eventually switch back? So new inequalities will also arise. Those who are more familiar with the digital, those who already have a taste of or have the means to enjoy good digital productions will enjoy more of it. But what about those who don't? How do we ensure that the digital divide does not widen further and lead or exacerbate the cultural divide? So next. I'll skip this. These were some of the research projects that we did in 2020 to try to sense make, to try to provide, to look around, to benchmark, provide some scientific evidence, and to try to do a little bit of evaluation of impact. Moving on, slide 9. So these are the slides 9 and 10 have some data that I've collected from August 2020 to March 2021 on the impact of COVID-19 on digital engagement in the arts. So we shared this with our arts community. We have also put this up on our website so that people can continue to access this. So quickly you can see the advantages and drawbacks of digital presentations. You reach more people, the whole world, but you also have to contend with more competition, right? So, and if you go to YouTube, you have a whole range of masterclasses with world names. So how do we ensure that, or how to encourage the local consumers to support first our local artists? So we also have audience demographics to help our artists see what sort of markets they like to sort of like enter, to penetrate through their offerings. We also have data on audience habits. So we noticed that digital arts consumptions were happening in the evening and night after working hours and in shorter durations as the economy slowly opened. So what does that mean for artists who want to put their work up on the online? Right? We also noticed that people, because they're coming back after work, have like shorter attention span, namely because they're tired or because there's just so many other things that they can access, and that reduces their intent to stay at one particular offering or presentation for long. The surveys also showed us the key motivations which help in marketing. Singaporeans wanted tangible personal benefits. They always want to go for things where they felt they were learning something new. They wanted to see something that they wouldn't otherwise see in lieu of traveling, and they wanted support for their own mental well-being. So we found also some evidence that Singaporeans are quite patriotic. Those who said they have paid for the arts did so because they said they wanted to support the artists in Singapore. Okay, I've got like 1 minute left. Next slide, please. So taking a step back, just move on, one more slide, slide 11, please. Yeah. So emerging not only in one piece, but stronger, requires not just transformation, but number one, accelerated transformation and the transformation of systems, processes, the products that are being offered or services being offered, and our competencies. So it's been said that this akin to like changing a car's tire while still driving it. I would say that this business of transformation to emerge stronger in post-pandemic normal is not just changing the tire, but also trying to tune and soup up the engine while driving the car. So while NAC's work, while much of the sector development effort that we've always been doing will continue, we have a new stream looking at industry value chains, transformation of the ecosystem, and so on and so forth. Okay, moving on. I will not go here because Arts and Tech Lab, Jia Yi spoke a little bit about it. So where do we go from here? So as part of the work we did on trying to suss out what are the movements towards a post-pandemic normal, we've identified like 5 key trends that our art makers could leverage. Number one, arts made accessible. We've mentioned that because on your online platforms have made your products available to the whole world. How do you ensure that you maintain your key competitive advantage, that people come to you rather than the rest of the world or your natural competitors of media or video games and all that. Right? So arts made accessible. How do you leverage digital platforms, and how do you leverage the specialness of the arts, and using a deeper understanding of VR and AR to make that particular presentation more exciting. Arts for a cause, we've noticed that young people are more and more drawn to things that they felt that they could support and to bring a community around. So how does the arts tap into this desire for youth to want to contribute back to society? How do arts partner with environmentalists, not necessarily Greta Thunberg, to give back to society? Next, the third trend that we can tap onto will be the Asian culture wave. There are now like 2 axes of influence in the world: the West and now increasingly China, and we're all very familiar with the Hallyu wave, the Koreans, and at one time the Japanese. So how do we come together as a sort of doorway to Asia to tap into our understanding of these markets, to be able and partner in order to create works that are special, right, for the world? The linearization of arts, we notice that people now, artists can go direct to the audiences. So how do we then help as a government? How do we help to provide platforms where the artists who may not be so used to promoting themselves on their own without the intermediary can do better? Or even if there were intermediaries, how can we grow more of them to help the arts community? And lastly, the 5th sort of trend to watch out for would be art as a lifestyle. We've said this all the time, that we want to make art an integral part of life, but really now that people are getting into a world with a different sort of lifestyle. They're going to be like safe, but yet they want to still to enjoy all the benefits of a pre-COVID world. So what role, what opportunities can it afford the arts? Okay, I've sort of zoomed through all of this because of the sort of, I can never make up my mind how much information I want to give, but happy to take on questions after this.
Wow, thank you, Sharon, for that very rich and insightful sharing. A lot of data and stats, and I'll come back to you. Let you have a breather first. But I think without further ado, let's just jump into the questions. And do keep them coming. I can see your questions on Zoom. Maybe Tian Hong, will start with you. With the level of engagement that you've managed to drive, the programs and the practice to, what were some of the initial, what were some of the resistance you faced at the start, maybe from the team? And another popular question here, there's just too much free content online. How did you actually navigate that?
Okay. Resistance from the team. Actually, I'm very lucky not to have very much resistance from them, because I think we were all locked at home, right? And what are you going to do other than try and figure out something? So we started trying to construct puzzles for ourselves and got entertained and, challenged by the puzzles. And then there was no turning back. I think it was harder to convince audiences because, what Sharon was sharing just now, I think the hardest thing is, first of all, of course, as artists, we have to have the will to try something and experiment and explore. But we're only one part of the puzzle. The other side is the audiences. Without them, the loop doesn't complete. And I think the hardest part is to educate them or to entice them or to just ask them to give us a shot at this. Because unless they enter into this arena, or else but the problem is that a few things, like for example, I've our past theater audiences who just say, okay, I'll buy a couple of tickets to a digital show. I don't think I can figure out how to get there, but I'll just give it to somebody young, right? So there are certain assumptions from the seniors or from people who are not as tech comfortable, who are not the digital native. How do they bridge this? I think the other challenge is exactly the paying content. I think the audiences also did not, I think they're getting more savvy, were unable to differentiate between qualities of work, or even finding out what works for them, right? Some people like things more pre-recorded, and when it's pre-recorded, often you are able to do a better job in the post-production to make it, more polished, right? Things that's live streamed sometimes is a little harder because it's just on the fly. But at the same time, I think that the audiences can learn, and we are seeing a trend that they are figuring out for themselves when they want to watch it, how they want to watch it. And they also have discovered certain convenience. For example, they don't have to beat the traffic to get to a show. They can just say, oh, can watch at home, fine. They're actually some more open to watching it. But there's definitely a lot of scaffolding. And one of the ways I think about it is, in the past, a lot of times we do production and we take it for granted that the audience will be there. They know where to find us. They buy the ticket, walk into the door, and we're right there. Lights down, they watch it. Lights up, they leave. All of these conventions are now out the window. Sometimes they don't know where to find us. Sometimes they don't know how to keep engaging with us. And when they're lost, they don't know where to get help. They don't they don't know that they are supposed to control volume themselves. So there are a lot of these things that is a re-education, the whole set of awareness that whether we like it or not as artists, we cannot take it for granted. We really need to have an awareness of how to scaffold this experience and how to make it possible for different kinds of audiences to engage, and also to manage our expectation what engagement really means.
Thank you. Thanks for that sharing. Thought it would be, maybe picking up from that, Jia Yi, I think, based on your work, you're multi-hyphenate, right? Like so many things, the art, the tech, knowing the network. Do you find that there's an increasing need for artists of today to be able to do this, string all these resources and networks together? And how would you advise artists to balance all these demands on the work?
So there's two questions to it. The first one I'll answer first, which is, in a way, let me know if I'm interpreting the question correctly. Basically, do artists of today, do they have to know tech, right? I think that itself, it's a personal question. So you can really choose to want to be a tech artist, or to really jump in, maybe learn a new Python language or things like that. But on the other hand, I think it's okay to choose not to, but it's still being open, to maybe using or trying tech as a medium, and finding the partner, which I always see. So, you don't have to do it yourself, everything yourself. Maybe, you find a new partner and you can roughly know what the working process is like, because it's the same thing for me. I actually came from an economics background. And it's really, I don't really know tech that much. I'm not a tech person, really. That's me in the code that I see. But I know enough to understand how the working process is like. And I fill in the information gap with the partners that we bring in. So that's really how I approach it. And maybe that's a insight that I would give. Sorry, could you repeat the second part of the question, please?
How can artists actually start to expand these networks? Like where do you go? How do you start?
Because I'm working on the Arts and Tech Lab, I have to do a shout out. We do have a Slack community. You can join us on the Arts and Tech Lab Slack. The information is on the NAC website. And of course, there are also other labs, be it in Singapore, for instance, National Gallery Y Lab. There's also, overseas international lab. And the thing about digitalization and living in this age is, you can be in Singapore and joining an overseas residency of sorts.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Maybe if I may zoom out a little bit. Oh, yeah, Sharon, you want to respond to it? Go ahead.
I was going to add a bit about GRE. Okay, again, I go back to my surveys. In surveys, right, audiences often say that the top motivator for them to watch a certain production is word of mouth. And that's, I was thinking about it, right? I'm just being philosophical. That's very Singaporean, because we want to make sure that whatever we invest in or whatever we choose is a good thing. We don't just read reviews, we want a personal recommendation. And so I thought this was actually a very powerful thing, that if we could come together as a community, spread the word, and continue to spread the word. I have a arts resource hub, but hardly anyone uses it. So if people hung out and like networked, that sort of like starts a sort of like snowballing, right? So that word of mouth and that sort of like coming together as a community. I use a second anecdote as well. Scientists are all very, like, in a way, selfish people, because you want to sort of like get to the application before anyone else does, right? I mean, in general, economists as well. But what changed in COVID was that suddenly we realized it is not a single country problem, it's a global problem. And people like sharing stuff that they would otherwise not have shared. People like rushing. And so, I mean, and I thought about this, but in the arts we have been doing for a long time, right? You tell artists about sort of opportunities, but it's just how to make sure that this is more prevalent and done on a sort of a very natural basis. Yeah. Okay. Just
thank you. Thanks for sharing that. It's 3.5 cents. So coming to you for your 5 cents worth now. You did share 5 trends to watch, right, in the presentation, the last part of it. Maybe for the benefit of many of our participants who are keen, more specifically in the area and the practice of art for social good, what's a piece of advice you have for them to better tune into, where the sector is about to develop? How do they align their work into the big picture?
Okay, I'm struggling to answer your questions because there are many parts to it. Okay, so in the NAC, I start with NAC, how we organize ourselves. I mean, we have the sector, and that's really supporting artists to develop practice and all that. We also have a department called the Engagement and Participation sector, which really looks at how arts can be applied and be made more meaningful to the community. Right. So in some countries, instrumentalization of the arts continues to be a sort of not approved term. But in Singapore, I think, we accept that the arts has many functions, really, right? So so getting into this sector can be through the NEC, for example, because we have such a department, or really it could be with our other partners within the government, such as our Ministry of Health or the People's Association, which uses art for different purposes, right? So, and I think the COVID-19 sort of like really brought this to the fore, because it's like, how can our arts help people who are really struggling with mental issues, right? How can, for me personally as an economist, I always champion this movement to careers like arts therapy, music therapy, right? So where you are both, still making art, using art, but still doing good for the larger community. So I'm not sure if I've answered the question.
Yeah, I think it was more, what are some entry points for artists who want to be able to continue that work with a social mission, but yet keep up with the demands of artists in terms of being more digital savvy, knowing how to form these networks. Yeah, so thank you for sharing your views on that. Maybe I'm going to pick another question from the floor, maybe addressed to Jia Ying and Jian Hong. How do you balance the degree of monetization when it comes to digital performances? Like, when do you charge? When do you not charge? How much do you charge? What's the market like? Jia, you want to go first?
For me, as a company, we get paid project fees. So, but of course, we do consult arts and culture organization on monetization components as well. It's a tough question, because there are a lot of things to, not trying to geek out a bit here, putting on the producer hat really. There's thinking about your bottom line, the people that you have to pay, what is the break-even point? And of course, as a company, or even as a collective, or as an artist, in terms of your practice, how much of your work do you want it to be via funds? And funds in the sense of government funds, foundations and stuff like that. How much of it do you want it to be from ticketing? And the last part of it is then, you can kind of rejig how much you want to charge. But of course, it's also thinking about in terms of ticket pricing, or as with all kinds of pricing in the world itself, what is the breaking point in the sense of how much would be too much that audiences would not actually want to pay? So I think there's really a lot of consideration then, and there really isn't a magic number, but it's really having yourself or someone to walk you through all these considerations, so that at the end of the day, you are still able to pay yourself and your collaborators, and still get the production kind of quality that you want.
Can I offer a data point?
Yes, Sharon, you want to? Yes, please.
So again, from my COVID surveys, I've got to make sure they're being used. So 20% of Singaporeans, or the respondents, say they're willing to spend $20 or more for digital content. So that's sort of like starting point you want that to work with. So Singaporeans are not I remember about 10 years ago when I asked about price point for the Singapore Writers Festival, it was $10. So now it's gone up to $20. So there's progress. But those are people who spend more than $50 during this COVID. On local artists, it's only 3% of the respondents. On foreign artists, about 4%. So about the same, but a very, very small percentage. So if you want to reach larger amount, maybe start with $20.
Thanks, Sharon. Any thoughts?
Yeah, maybe I pitch in on this. I think it's a very difficult question to decide on prices, because this is a struggle even before COVID. Selling tickets has always been challenging, right? But the fact that I'm willing to pay $10 or $20 doesn't mean that I would pay $10 and $20 come and see you. It just means that this is a price point that I would consider. It's the conversion that's hard, right? To make them actually get So it goes back to maybe connecting a little bit to what Sharon was answering just now about the trend and the economics and all those things. I do think that when we started doing digital theater productions, it was not because we necessarily saw a business opportunity. We were just, as artists, we had to create, right? If you want to look at business trends, actually stock market is a better place to start making money than looking at theater and the arts, right? I mean, the economists will tell us, right? This is not a place where you're going to find a pot of gold. Never, especially as a nonprofit. So the question is then, why do you continue to do this? You do this because you have no other choice but to do this. That this is the only way you know how to tell stories. And this is the most important way that you believe that connection between people is important. So even if you lose money out of your nose, you will still do it. Even if nobody's paying for it, you will still try to do it. So I do think that it has to be first very selfish, as in like the engine has to come from each individual artist to want to do this. And then only after you have figured out what your relationship with it is, then you have to think about then what is the relationship with that specific audience that you want to connect with. There are places that you go to that you can never do it for free, because once you do it, then you can no longer climb yourself out of that hole. Not just for you, it actually is for the value of the arts in that context, right? And there are places that I would pay money to get you to watch it, right? So I think the question is not a mathematical question for me. The question actually is a purpose question first, right? If you understand that this is the purpose, then the money makes sense. I mean, we are very lucky today where we have 24 staff. My predecessors, they actually started doing shows, then figured out how to find money. They always said, got money, then don't have to do anymore, right? They were actually the reverse, but they were the true blue, passionate, must do it or else die kind of people. Today, we actually can look at data and look at markets. And I'm not saying those things are not important, because those things also put us, because we cannot be disconnected with the rest of the world. I think those things are also important, but that spark and that engine first have to come from each individual or as a collective, whether it makes sense for you to go down this path that is very volatile and that is going to, not an easy path, whether digital or physical.
Thank you. Thanks, Jian Hong. Yeah, I totally agree with the idea of being very clear about your purpose. And, somehow everything will hopefully eventually make sense out of it. Yeah, maybe we have about 3 minutes left. So I thought maybe to ask a wrap-up question for everyone. Always there's this talk about the new normal, right? What the new normal will look like. Is digital here to stay? Do you foresee this becoming part of the future, or is there ever a day where we no longer have to think about hybrid? Perhaps maybe getting each of you to share your views on this. What does the new normal mean to you and your work?
Or maybe I'll jump in first, so I'll wrap this up. I think when they first brought electricity into theater and there's lighting, maybe they ask the same question. Just like when television was first, appearing, or streaming platform like Netflix, how does it change? I think it's an evolution. It will keep going. At the core of it is the yearning to say something and to hear something, right? So I think these are just forms. I do think that because it is a digital age, and a large percent of the population are digital natives, until some apocalypse happen and all the internet system will go, we are living in this. And I do think that maybe going back to a question earlier is, how do you find like-minded people? How do you find your community? How do you converge, right? I think arts resource or not, company structure, government structure or not, I think when there's a will, you will find your people. You'll find your tribe. And I think it's very important for you to find your tribe. And perhaps the place to start first is in the internet, to see what people are doing, to look at who's out there trying, maybe badly at this point, but then you can try together and be bad together, and find out what is the thing that you're willing to risk. So I do believe that the spirit doesn't change, physical or digital. The form changes, and the form will bring new challenges, and there's a lot of convincing to do. There's a lot of adaptation and, throwing away of assumptions to do in order for us to really pioneer new things, right? But I think it is no different before COVID. It's just the equation, that you're calculating is different, but there's still puzzles and equations to overcome.
Thank you, Jian Hong, for that thought. Jia Yi, would you like to pick up on that?
Yep, I think Jian Hong covered a lot of good points. So what I really want to say is, as we go back to the new normal or whatever it looks like, how can we still ensure that we are creating an inclusive and accessible environment? That is important, at least for me. How can we also, make the experience better? So really, like what Jian Hong said, the spirit remains, the form changes, right? But if, let's say, we choose to do a digital production, how can it be better or even of a different experience for audiences? So that's really from my end.
Okay,
Thanks, Jia Yi. Sharon?
Okay, so basically first I've got two parts. The first part concerns how it's going to impact my work. It's going to make my work much, much more difficult because my job is to make sure that there are insights that I can bring to help our artists, advocacy and all that. And once you go to digital, there's a whole new world out there. You don't even know where to start counting, right? And then you have to still put all these systems and processes in place. Okay, so that's my rant for the day. Very difficult work ahead, but exciting, like UK art, exciting. And the second part really is what for me is what are the most crucial things that we have to put in place. One for me is like the pace of change. It's really, it's mind-boggling, right? I mean, just COVID has just shown us that the sort of like the digital stuff that have come out like in 3 years in normal times, suddenly within 6 months it's like popped out. So how do we help our arts and culture practitioners who are about really into more reflective and thinking about deeper and longer impact to sort of navigate this world, right? And so that comes back to my job of having to measure impact. So how can I capture all the various ways? Because I really do believe that the arts has a very, very deep impact, and it doesn't show up so quickly, right? It changes generations, it changes the way we think. But investors, funders are often impatient for results. How do I bring this together to help arts make that case, right? So I'm caught in between. I'm totally sympathetic to the deeper impact and feelings, but yet I have to help deliver this so that people continue to invest in the arts. So I have no answers, but more questions. But it also means that we all continue to have a job. Right?
That's right. Actually, I think it's a great place to wrap up this afternoon's discussion. More questions, and maybe having the view that questions are the new answers, right? As we try to find our way forward. Once again, quickly summing up what we chatted about with our speakers during this panel discussion. Jian Hong spoke about the re-education of audiences, of artists, to really think about how your work will stand out and reach out to more people during this time. With artists, really that whole idea of expanding your network, knowing that don't do everything by yourself, please. Like there is a community out there. Do reach out and try and form these networks and find that tribe. Really, the third point here is what many people I say are concerned about, the monetization of projects. And really like that idea that Jian Hong left us with, that it really goes back to your purpose as an artist, why you're even making this work. And it is not the place where you find the pot of gold. This is a takeaway I will leave with. And just wrapping it up with thoughts on the new normal. It is truly a digital age, but the spirit of making the work won't change. So wherever you are, continue to press on with your work and just hold the faith that your work will someday make an impact. So I think please join me to give a round of virtual applause. I wish I can hear you, but I can't. To our panelists, thank you for your time this afternoon. For this very energizing discussion. So I'm sure all of us have gained many insights to add to our toolbox in tackling the changes that come along with digitalization of the arts. And if you have any ideas, for collaboration, you want to know more, I'm sure our friends at SIS and NEC will be really happy to connect. So once again, thank you, Sharon, Tianhong, and Jia Yi for this conversation. And I would like to hand the time back to Sherilyn to close the session.
Thank you, Jean. And thank you once again to our wonderful speakers and the audience for that insightful discussion. We've come to the end of today's session. If you're interested in learning more about the SIF's Arts for Good program, please check out the QR code on screen. We love that you've taken time to join us this afternoon from all corners of the world. Wishing you all the best in health and spirits. Goodbye.